All right, I wanted to put out a video talking about the upper lower split. I'll touch on why I like it, go over a few potential drawbacks and how you might work around them, and then cover some relevant programming considerations. First off, this is a proven split that can work for lifters of all levels. Doesn't mean it's perfect for everyone. Now, social media may skew your view on this, but probably 99% of the gym population and the vast majority of people consuming YouTube fitness content are beginners and intermediates, mainly beginners. Upper lower is a phenomenal plan of attack for lifters at this stage, so for the average viewer of this video, it's a great way to go about it. There are reasons why some lifters move away from the split when they reach that later advanced stage, but many high level natural lifters and competitive bodybuilders still structure their training this way. So let's get into why I like the upper lower split. A huge upside, especially when we're talking about people with normal lives and responsibilities, is the scheduling flexibility. Let's take a look at some variations on how you can schedule this. For most people, an upper lower split is going to entail 4 training sessions per week, with each week looking the same. So a synchronous split, 2 lower sessions and 2 upper sessions. You could take a couple of different approaches here. You could stack the sessions twice, back-to-back training days twice per week, or you could have back-to-back sessions once and a rest day separating the other two. With these setups, you train muscle groups with 2 times per week frequency, which is a solid baseline for most serious lifters. And actually, if you use that second variation, you could run 3 times per week frequency. Let's say you wanted to train forearms or calves 3 times per week. Throw an extra session in there, and you can still have at least 1 full day to recover. Then you have asynchronous approaches. You could do 2 days on, 1 day off, which if you ran consistently would result in slightly higher frequency, averaging a little over 2 times per week. You could train every other day, or 2 days on, 2 days off, which would each result in frequency a little under 2 times per week. Or you can employ a mix of these based on what's happening in your life. I call this the floating upper lower approach, and I'm actually going to dedicate an entire video to this, so stay tuned for that. Maybe your default routine is 2 days on, 1 day off, but something comes up and you need an extra rest day. No problem, take it and then continue on with your 2 days on, 1 day off. Or maybe you do every other day, but something is coming up on a planned training day, and so you stack 2 sessions back to back to free up your schedule and then continue on the every other day split after that. Another benefit is that joint and tendon recovery is about as straightforward as you can get. You're getting at least 2 full rest days between muscle groups and like movement patterns. Now, both of these splits can work well with a good program, but if you're running something like full body 3 times per week or lower torso bro, you run into situations where you may be stressing the same structures with only 1 day of rest or in back-to-back training days. For example, with full body, doing a quad movement 3 times per week could get tricky on the knees, or in a lower torso bro split, doing pressing on a torso day, the day before triceps isolation, could bother the elbows for some. Now let's go through some potential downsides of an upper-lower split and how you might at least partially mitigate these. So when we're talking about a comprehensive upper body session, you're probably going to have a fair amount of movements. I'll get into what an upper body day might look like in a second, but in some cases you might be looking at 7 or 8 movements if you want to target everything effectively. And there are a couple potential issues here, one being the impact on session length and mental focus. A lot of people have to stick to a schedule and can't spend 2 hours in the gym. Most want to keep it to 45 minutes to an hour, hour 15 max, and having a lot to do can keep you in the gym for a while. Along with being impractical, this can have a detrimental impact on focus. If you had a session and all you were going to do was a couple exercises, let's say you're going to do 3 sets of barbell rows and 3 sets of bench, that's it, it would be easy to be laser focused. There's not much to do. But when you have a lot of movements, that focus can start to fade during the session, and along with the negative impact on training enjoyment, this can be bad for the gains as you're just not putting as much into the movements. So here are some tips to help you combat this. 1, focus on hard sets and lower volume. 2 sets for most movements and 3 max. If you can safely push to failure, do it. Get the most out of every set. 2, lower your rest intervals. Now, I like longer rest times, usually like 3 to 4 minutes personally, but if you're trying to stick to a schedule, don't be afraid to get down to around 2 minutes when appropriate. In the grand scheme of fitting training into a busy life, this is completely fine. Also, I would suggest you superset movements where you can to save time. Something like pressing and pulling, triceps and biceps, and side and rear delts could all be a good move. Lastly, within reason, look at allocating certain exercises to the lower body day to even out the movement count. Something like biceps to start a lower body day can be a smart play. It's not very fatiguing, and it could even warm you up for the lower body day. And you actually might get more out of this training because you're doing them fresh as opposed to after a bunch of upper body work. Now, I do core on lower body day for this reason, but I don't really like doing it elsewhere. Lower body training is hard enough, and I tend to lose focus with anything else included. I've actually seen YouTuber Basement Bodybuilding put his horizontal pulling on lower body days. That's certainly a way of trimming down the upper body session, but personally, I wouldn't like doing this in my own training, but we're all different. Another downside is that it's hard to really focus on any given muscle group in a full upper body session because you're trying to cover a lot of bases. And to address this, you can prioritize a muscle through exercise order and exercise selection. Let's say you wanted to focus on triceps. From an exercise selection standpoint, you can use presses with greater triceps involvement and start the session off with those lifts, something like a close grip bench that still hits chest but hits more triceps. You could also include more isolation for delts and chest as opposed to pressing to allow for more triceps work, something like flies for chest and lateral raises for side delts. And one last con to the upper lower split, or just a 2 day split in general, is that it can be annoying to try and fit in ancillary work like forearm work, shoulder health movements, and neck work. Not that it can't be done, it can just be tiresome to have so many things on the to do list in a session. To combat this, I would say if you're able to do any of this stuff at home, I would suggest that. Otherwise, you could just superset where appropriate to squeeze things in. So let's take a look at what these upper and lower sessions might look like in a 4-day per week training setup. Now, one note on exercise selection: if you're a beginner, you might benefit from doing the same workout twice per week. That is the same lower and upper body workouts 2 times per week. You're not very strong, so you're not generating a lot of fatigue, and you're still learning the movement, so you'll likely progress faster this way. For example, if you RDL one plate for working sets, you can probably recover and come back several days later and do the same movement no problem. After that initial soreness, of course, if you're new to the movement, where that would be a lot harder for someone RDLing, let's say, 4 plates. Just keep that in mind as my sample program here uses variations between the training days. Also, this is not a minimalist routine. There is a way to structure training to cover a lot of bases with minimal work. That approach may not get you the best possible results, but everyone has different goals and priorities. So anyways, if someone who has been in the gym for a year or two and is serious about lifting came up to me for advice, I'd recommend something like this. Let's start with the lower body as it's a bit more straightforward. So for some notes here, I enjoy hinging twice per week, and I like to have an RDL as my main hinge, generally paired with some form of back extension in the other lower body session. It's not necessary to have 2 hinges in your program. You could just do RDLs on one day, and that's it for the week. But personally, I like hinging twice, and I like using back extensions because they are a pure hinge and they're not as fatiguing as the RDL. I have hamstring and quad isolation once per week each to keep total movements to 5 per session. In my own training, I like having quad and hamstring isolation every lower body day, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend this to the average lifter. When I do this, I do alter technique and rep range on each training day to change the stimulus a little bit. On the RDL day, I like having some sort of big quad movement that isn't fatiguing on the lower back so I can still push hard, something like a leg press or machine squat. And on the other day, we'll do those barbell squats fresh. For most people, I'm not a fan of more than one heavy duty, and by that I mean non-isolation quad movement in a session. So for instance, doing a leg press and a squat in the same session. This can absolutely be done, and if I were all in on quads, I might add a couple sets of another movement, perhaps a lunge, but in my opinion, this is too much for most people, and their effort and focus will suffer heavily with that much on the menu. You can throw in glute isolation like a thrust if you want. I'd say you're already getting a solid stimulus from hinging and squatting. One option would be to replace the back extensions with hip thrusts or some other glute-focused movement if you want. And as far as adductors go, I do believe that adductors grow best with isolation, but they are going to be stimulated to some extent with what we have, and I don't want to include too many movements. Now, before we get into a sample upper program, let's take a look at the type of work we might see in a full upper body session. Now, this is 8 movement slots. It's possible to include something for every slot, but that is a lot of exercises. Not something I would recommend for the average lifter, but if you do try and fit all this in, I'd circle back to my advice from earlier. Also, keep in mind that certain movements can effectively check off more than one of these boxes. For instance, maybe you're content with the rear delt stimulation you get from pulling movements and cut out the isolation. Maybe you say, all right, chest and front delts are covered with an incline press, and I'm doing side delt isolation, so I'll cut out the vertical press. And if you include something like a close grip bench or dip, you could count that as your chest and triceps work. With this logic, you could trim down a session to 4 to 6 movements, depends on your priorities and preferences. So here's a sample setup. I've put this together with the constraint of keeping the session to a maximum of 6 movements. So in the first session, we have vertical pulling and pressing first, and in the second, we start out with horizontal pulling and pressing. On the first day, we're cool with pulling and vertical pressing covering side and rear delts, so no isolation there. And we're going to say that close grip bench knocks out chest and triceps in session 2, and we don't include a vertical press. We're going to say front and side delts are covered with the close grip bench and the Lou raise. So here is the full setup. We'll use that second synchronous variation where we put a rest day in between the first lower and upper sessions. This isn't a big deal at all, but you might like having that extra day to get a little rest between the Romanian deadlifts and the back work on the first upper day. When you stack upper and lower sessions, the order is really up to your preference. When I plan this out for my own training, I just want to make sure that whatever I'm doing on the first day doesn't interfere with the second day too much. If you're doing free weight squatting and hinging on a lower day, fatiguing the upper body the day prior may negatively impact your performance on those movements. That's why I usually like doing lower before upper. Most people seem to prefer the other way around. You could make the case that a tough lower session would negatively impact an upper session the day after. Depends on your priorities. Do what works best for you. I'll wrap this up by saying I think a 4-day upper-lower split is a great home base for your training, and by this I mean you can start here and modify your training split based on your goals and how many days you can get in the gym. If you're sticking to a synchronous split each week, you can modify your split while still keeping a full upper and lower session. If you want to go down to 3 days, you can keep a full lower and upper session, and for the third day, condense training into a full body session. I have a video dedicated to this split. Feel free to check that out. And if you want to increase to 5 days to give more dedicated attention to other parts of the body, you could do something like lower upper legs push pull, or lower upper lower torso bro, or if you want to focus on the legs more, lower upper glutes hams quads upper. So hopefully this helped. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below or email me at zdspyt@gmail.com. Let me know about any topics you want me to cover in future videos. Check out my free training resources playlist. I have files you can use to plan out and track your training, keep a record of your PRs, and manage bulks and cuts. I also have a longer video in there that includes a couple free programs inspired by my Most Jacked Fullback series. Those programs come with tracking files and guidance on things like substitutions, intensity, volume, and progression. That is all. Have a good day.